Thank you for joining us for yet another episode of Right Circle, which is presented by Sri Cements and is done in association with Prabhakatan Foundation, Essas Women and Spagia Foundation, and of course Siahi. We have a very different book today, and I am just so delighted that people have started writing about this subject in India, where we have thousands of years of history about it. And we use it every single day of our lives, and yet nobody gives it a thought how much goes into the making of a perfume, what are the stories associated with it, how are these smells captured the imagination of people who created those infusions or what have you. I don't know the technicalities, but the moment this book landed on my desk, I immediately called the publisher and I said, this is just brilliant. I need to have her for my next Right Circle. So we have with us today Divrina Dhingra, who's a writer and a journalist. She's a graduate of the Columbia University School of Journalism, and she has previously worked at Elle, Vogue, Harper's Bazaar as a writer and an editor. And she also has an independent fragrance brand called The Perfume. You worked at? Okay, sorry, my mistake. Well, it's as good as owning it. And holding the conversation with her is Urvi Bhuvania, who's the COO at Siahi. She studied to be an engineer, but didn't work for her. So she's in love with books, with great coffee, also alcohol. And obviously a resident Cocker Spaniel. But she has actually, I'm making light of it because she's like my bacha, but she has been the executive producer for each and every major festival event that Siahi has done in the last decade. And not just in Jaipur, but across the subcontinent. So, yeah, I guess we're okay with her. But thank you again for joining us.
What inspired you to write a book on perfumes?
Well, I just, I'm going to be absolutely honest about this because I tell everyone I wish I had. Can you hear me now? So I wish I had like a story that said that, when I was really young, I was really interested. I was not. But when I was in graduate school, I was really stressed, and I used to go to all these very beautiful boutiques in New York where they would, display the fragrances in ways that I'd never seen, and I used to spend some time there smelling. And when I came back to India and I was working with Vogue, the beauty section, we get a lot of press releases, you read about fragrance all the time, but you read about it in this way that's written to be very exotic, but also I think quite opaque, and that just made me more curious about. Felt like I wanted to know the origin stories of some of these ingredients and these fragrances, and know like what are the human stories behind them. And so I just started reading and doing a little bit of exploration on my own, and just took it from there. I started writing it out of. Really, I was very curious, and that's how I started researching it.
That's wonderful. In the book, you talk about the Madeline effect, how a combination of smells leads to a powerful rush of emotions. Would you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think we've all experienced this. It's the Madeline effect is this very specific term that comes from a book written by Proust, where he talks about how he talks about these memories of this particular tea and Madeleine that he used to have with his aunt or something, and the smell of that and the texture of that and the taste of that, and how it really invokes this kind of nostalgia in him. And that's I think very easily a phenomena very easily co-opted by fragrance, that we all have really personal associations with whatever fragrance. You can take anything, and I think anything and anyone, and they'll have like a story about it, something it reminds them of, some place they've been to, something pleasant, something unpleasant, and none of those stories are alike, and I think that's fascinating.
What you've also written about as you explore perfumery is how the various ancient empires, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Mughals, how all of them explored the art of perfumery. What are the differences in how each of them looked at perfumery? What are the similarities amongst all of them?
So I think all of these, well, firstly, like, it was dependent on what was available, which was always like a resin, a wood. Those are the oldest fragrances. In terms of like different empires, I think the Egyptians were the most dedicated to this craft. Again, it could be that they just have documented it the best, because this is something that happens often. What you know is what is what you write about. But even very recently, there's been another discovery of a sort of mummified remains of this woman who would have been a wet nurse to a future pharaoh. And so when she was preserved, they found the fragrance that they call the fragrance of the afterlife that the Egyptians would use to for royalty and things like that. And then they've now analyzed it and found that it contains ingredients from as far away as Southeast Asia, which is probably India, and as well as like a few other places that they traded with. So you see, so the Egyptians did like this fantastic job of it. And then you have, I think, also really good documentation with the Mughals, of course. And I think the ways in which Itar survives now is thanks to the Mughals, I would say. Because predating that, the information is a little bit patchy. And also it comes down to more of like woods and resins that were used. So yeah, and then with the Romans, we know again, that they were, the Romans were kind of hedonists, and they used a lot of fragrance in a lot of ways. And they had like a lot of trade with, again, also with Asia, with Southeast Asia, with India. They had the Phoenicians and the Arabian countries and the African countries, and so there was, there are all these stories that you read of like banquets where everything was fragranced and rose water was flowing and rose oil was flowing, so they were really like over the top. And the Greeks before them used fragrance, but they were a little more restrained. For them, fragrance was something that was used more in worship and in the temples. So it wasn't meant to be used the way the Romans did it. And yeah.
You've talked about the trade and the resins or the woods that they had access to, which sort of dictated how they explored perfumery. Now, one of the more famous trade routes in the world, everyone talks of the Silk Route. But there was a robust trade between India and the Red Sea ports, essentially, right? Yeah. Tell us about that. How did that influence the perfumery of the time?
So the trade went in this, like, yeah, they have discovered, this is like, they've discovered it more lately, where the archaeologists have found particularly one Red Sea port called Bernike. And there they've found that evidence of, they always knew that there was like trade between India and so this is all like the Roman trades via the Red Sea ports, but now they've discovered like Buddha statues and some Vaishnavite statues as well as some tablets which detail like insurance money paid and tax paid on things that have traveled from ports here, in particularly in Muziris in Kerala. And a lot of those, I think we can say, would have been spices. So there would have been pepper for sure, and but also they have found so there was a plant, I forget the name, but it smells like cinnamon. It's kind of like a false cinnamon, and so that would have been used for fragrance. Maybe in some concoctions. It's just that it's the kind of it's a more ancient route than the Silk Route, which was an overland route, which also has a lot of like romanticism associated with it, a lot of stories, some of which are made up. But that this predates that, and it just tells us for how long back we've been trading with other parts of the world, and how like fragrant materials have always been a part of that trade.
When you were writing this book, you've also traveled across the country, particularly exploring the various perfumes that are being made here. One of the first places I think you said you visited was Kannauj, which is also
Yes.
the perfume capital of India in a way.
Yeah.
Tell us about visiting that and how it was to meet the distillers over there.
It was a real eye-opener. I mean, I think like I told you earlier, because I started writing this out of sheer curiosity, I knew nothing. So I went everywhere that I went just asking the most basic questions, and really just trying to learn and see. And so Kannauj was, and I think I've been really fortunate. All the places that I've been to in order to do this research are cities and places that I do not think I would have gone otherwise on my own for any reason. So Kannauj is, it's totally an eye-opener. It's a small town in in UP, and you go there, and parts of it are still, the old parts of it still look like really medieval, and there's it's full of distilleries, and they're all businesses that have been around for a few generations, and they all kind of exist, at least on the face of it, what you'll see when you go there, they all exist in the same way that they've existed also for like decades at least, if not longer. So it was really special. Everyone that I met there was, firstly, I think I have to say they were extremely patient with me, because when I tell you that I knew nothing, I knew nothing. They were really patient with me, they were very hospitable, and they showed me around, and that's when I first saw this Deg and Bhabka setups that are really, in a way, like it's like this, the penny drops kind of moment, because it's the kind of distillation that is the only kind of distillation that you actually know, and it's what you do in the chemistry lab and what you see, very basic. But at the same time, it's like on this big scale, everything is handmade, and it was really fascinating. And
you mentioned in the book about this gentleman that you met in Kannauj who offered you this sweet. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, he was Mr. Jain. Mr. Jain, who had troubled incessantly. I used to call them all the time. When can I come? Now can I come? Now can I come? And when I went there, they produce their own rose oil as well. They have fields, and they, so when I went there, he offered me this mithai, and he said, you must try it, and I must have said no in the beginning, because he said, no, you must try it. It's made with pure rose oil. And so out of curiosity, I tried it, and he told me that, it's our own rose oil, it's really pure, and one of the reasons that they use it is so that later when you've eaten this and you burp later, it's going to taste of roses. I was fascinated. I still am. I have never come across that again.
Yeah, that is fascinating. Going from a small town of Kannauj and the hand distillation that you're talking about, you also enroll yourself in a perfumery school in France.
Yeah.
Where it's the capital of the modern perfume industry in a way. So how was that different from Kannauj?
So it's completely different, firstly, but just in terms of like geography and location. Grasse is in the south of France. It's also a small town, and it's also very medieval looking. They have these gullies really, and these big walls like a fort, and it's built inside of that. I enrolled myself because that was the point at which I had just begun working with a perfume brand, and I felt like I needed more of an education than I had in order to work. But it was completely different in the sense that that was also my introduction to modern laboratories and the way that perfumery works now, and my introduction to synthetics, which I know get like a really bad name. Everyone has this black and white image of like the naturals and the synthetics, and I think I did too to some extent, because previous to that I had only either had done like a lot of reading, which I had done, or I had been to Kannauj and I had seen all the things that we produced here, and they're all natural. So grass was a lot of learning in a very short time. In that course, essentially we sit in a basement and you just smell all day. And you like have paper strips and you're dipping them into different things and you're smelling them and you're trying to memorize all these smells. And so first you go through all the naturals and then you hit the synthetics, and it's just this whole new world. So, but one of the things I noticed was that Grass is it's a really celebrated place. You know, they also have this, they have a long tradition of producing fragrance. The French fragrance industry really started over there, and it has its own stories and it has its own history, and it's managed to really use that to its advantage and make it into this very popular tourist spot. They still have the perfumeries that are still producing some fragrance, or they're just doing it in a cosmetic way, you know, so that people can come and see and they can try their hand at it and things like that. And so I've always felt like there's no reason we shouldn't be able to do that here. Kannauj is, I would argue, it's maybe a little more challenging to go there than to be in the south of France, but it's just as interesting, and it isn't just, it's still the hub of trade for fragrance in India, so there's still business carrying on there. So it's, yeah.
You mentioned naturals and synthetics when you're talking about perfumery. Now, all your travels, you've come across perfumeries that look at natural materials, you're looking at synthetics, perfumeries that are using more hand techniques versus those that are using more machines. Within the industry first, is there a leaning towards one of these techniques over the other? I know that we constantly keep talking about how people are sort of chasing the handmade more these days, or the natural more. But from within the industry, one, is there a leaning? Two, is there really a big difference or not?
First of all, my research was handpicked, so I didn't go to perfumeries, but I went to producers and growers, so I'm only looking at naturals and looking at what in India we are known for. In perfumery in general, I think this is actually it's a little complicated, because naturals are really, really beautiful. When you smell naturals, each one is like a complete fragrance in itself, and it's really complex. From a chemistry point of view, it's really complex because it's thousands of molecules, and synthetics are a little simpler because they're synthesized. But at the same time, you really need both in order to make something beautiful, and every fragrance that you buy that's a brand fragrance, that's a really beautiful one that you would buy at duty free or whatever it is, typically will have both. The more natural it has, the more expensive it's going to be. But I'm a big fan of the synthetics because of the ways in which you can work with them. You can do really abstract things, and there's this, in the 90s was when there were a lot of fragrances I don't know, maybe everyone will know this, Cool Water and CK1, and those all brought in this these watery smells, this idea of seaside and fresh breeze, I mean, those things don't exist in naturals. Those are all like very clever, very beautiful synthetics that some chemist has sat and made and won awards for. And so with synthetics, you can do those amazing things. Or like there's been a huge trend for fragrances that smell like candy, like chocolate, like pralines. You know, people love those. And again, that's not a smell that you find in nature. So that's something that someone thought of and thought of how to use. Yeah, so there's, you know, for me, synthetics are like this fascinating universe, and also naturals are, when you work with a natural palette, you'll have like 50 to 80 things to work with, and then you bring in these synthetics, and then you have thousands, so you can do so much more.
Speaking of making perfumes, you've mentioned in the book there are 3 parts to a perfume. Any perfume has 3 parts. What are those parts, if you could tell everyone? And if there is a certain role all of these parts play in the scent as we smell it finally.
Yeah, really quickly, it has 3 parts, which is the top notes, the middle notes, and the base notes. And they're classified like that because that's the order in which they will kind of evaporate. So the top notes are always the more volatile molecules, citrus notes and things like that. You'll smell those first. So when you first spray something, that's what you're going to smell. The heart notes are usually florals. They can be anything, but they're like a bridge between the top and the bottom. And they'll come next, and they'll be on your skin for some time. And then if you wear a fragrance and you wear it, you forget about it, you come back and you smell wherever you sprayed it, maybe 20 minutes, half an hour later, you're going to be smelling the base notes. And so that's really their function. Some base notes are also fixatives, so they act on the entire fragrance to make sure it lasts longer, to give it like a little more character. That's very basically what it is. When we wear ether, we typically only have heart notes and base notes. A traditional ether is either just an essence, right. So it's just the essence of the flower usually, or it's distilled over sandalwood, which is a base note. So there aren't really any top notes when it comes to ether. There are all these like base notes and some heart notes, which are florals.
You mentioned sandalwood. Now, sandalwood is one of those scents that earlier it began as something that was used only in worship or only by the kings or the royalty. Over time, of course, it is now being used by everyone. How has that evolution been? Because it is a really comforting smell.
Sandalwood is, sandalwood is beautiful. And in India, there's a few different species, but the one that we grow in India is like, it's really special all over the world. It's, the smell of it is really coveted, I would say. And you're right that it was used historically by, kings or whatever. It was used for worship. It continues to be used in those ways. And the really simple reason for that is because it's so expensive. So it was so expensive like back then, and it's like 100 times more expensive now, because now also it's pretty much wiped out. It grows in the Western Ghats, and so we had huge forests, which had these beautiful old sandalwood trees. A tree needs to be, the older it is, the more valuable it is, because the better the quality of the oil that you distill from it. So all of those like old growth forests and stuff, that's gone. Mostly it's been poached a lot. So now what you have is, I think we live in a time when all of these things are now so accessible. So there's sandalwood being grown in plantations now because you can't anymore get it naturally from forests. So there's different species of sandalwood, and brands use that, so you get to smell it and you get to use it, whereas 100 years ago there was like no chance. And but also I will say that there are given that like natural sandalwood is so rare and it's so expensive, it's so hard to get, there's some amazing synthetics. So there's and the like the big perfume houses make these synthetics and they're captive ingredients. So they'll develop it and they'll use it for themselves only. And they're really expensive, they're really lovely, and they're really able to mimic the naturals pretty closely. So you probably won't even know, but you can still smell sandalwood. Real sandalwood, you still have to go south, go to Mysore. I think the factory over there is still the one place where you'll get the real oil. Mysore sandal soap is actually still like a benchmark for for a product that has really good Mysore sandalwood in it. And yeah, it's just one of those ingredients that is really special, that's been poached almost out of existence. There's where they grow it now, the plantations, they have like a lot of security because it still gets poached. Where I did the research was at a campus in Bangalore, which, they just grow it incidentally. It's a research campus where they research woods. And they told me that they had a few old trees, and then they had these fantastic stories of like these middle of the night, poachers came, and poachers always come armed with guns and things like that, and that's what happened.
Did something like this happen while you were there?
No, sadly not.
From down south, let's go straight to the north. You were in Kashmir doing research during saffron harvesting season. How was that? Because these are all, again, indigenous farmers who are doing this, who've grown this for generations. And you've said something about they just know when the time is right. There is no real technique, or I don't know. That's the wrong word to use, but...
Yeah, to some extent, I think that's also just what they say. Because again, you have to remember, I have gone in everywhere asking the most basic, annoying questions to these people, and I've been relentless about it. So, but in some cases, yeah, we just know. They know going by the season, this is the time to sow them and this is the time to harvest them. Kashmir was, I think, in some ways it was a little bit harder because it was harder to get access. I was lucky enough that to be able to go through a Kashmiri friend who introduced me to a grower who agreed to let me come and see the harvest and see the production. I think I was really nervous about it because I was going in with all these with this list of questions, and they were actually nervous about it because they didn't know why I wanted to be there, and they were nervous about it because all the work is done, the production work is done by hand, and it was a room full of men who just were sitting in a circle and patiently like doing this work. So for them to let this like one girl come in and just sit in a corner and be this fly on the wall and like take notes, they were nervous about it. But again, I've been so lucky because everywhere I've been, they were so hospitable and answered all my questions very patiently.
Yeah, we can see that in the book.
But I'd say Kashmir is the one place where something exciting happened because I had gone to Pampur and with the aim of like, you see the harvest and then you see the production and then we'll go to the market and we'll see the saffron being sold over there and maybe we'll find some oil as well, even though it's not distilled in Kashmir. But we were going to do that, and then they said that you have to go back immediately. There's been some encounter on the road that you came by, so now take the other road and go back. So that was my one exciting incident.
Unfortunately, when you were in Kashmir. You've said somewhere in the book that in perfumery, oud has been a trend that refuses to leave around the world. Why is that? Why is oud always so relevant?
So oud is again one of those things that is like just eye-wateringly expensive and rare, and so it's always been a thing, as in if you in the Middle East, it's never gone away. But I think in the West, it, maybe it hadn't become so popular, and then there were certain brands that started making these fragrances. I think the first one that became really popular was a Tom Ford fragrance where they started using oud, and I think they also a lot of brands started using oud in these fragrances because these were being marketed to the Middle East, and the Middle East is a huge market for fragrance, and there's certain kinds of fragrances that always do well over there. It's woods and ambers and things like that, and then it just became so popular. It hasn't really gone out at all, and so it's one way of, I think it's just like, it just proves how all trends are completely cyclical, and they keep coming back and they keep coming back, because there are only so many naturals. You're not discovering any new naturals at this point. But also oud is, I was surprised, I'm always surprised that it is as popular as it is, because it's not an easy smell to like. It's not like sandalwood. Sandalwood is really cozy, it's really yummy, it's really beautiful, you can't not like it. But oud can be, it's a really difficult acquired taste when you smell the oil.
Right. One of the buzzwords everywhere is climate change and how it's affecting everything, life as we know it. How is it affecting the perfume industry, if I may call it?
Again, when it comes to naturals, it's really raising prices. In my research, I spoke about it really more in detail with the gentleman I met who was distilling Khas in UP, because North Indian Khas is what they call, it's not cultivated, it's a wild harvest. So Khas just grows, and they collect it, villagers collect it, and they come and sell it, and then in the winter it's distilled. So this thing of like it just grows, and the land for that is dwindling because more land is now developed, but also it depends on climate, and so it's one of those things that it's really rare and it's really beautiful. It's a wild harvest; those are really unusual. But yeah, it's also now endangered because you don't know how long it's going to be able to carry on in the way that it's carried on, so in the south it's cultivated, and it's a slightly different species. In the north it's this wild harvest, and the people in the north, they really believe that this is the best way to do it. It has to be collected like this, and it has to be harvested like this, and this is superior. And that's of course a matter of like debate. You can or cannot agree. But then I was like, okay, well, if you believe that this is the only way to do it, what's the plan? Because and there isn't one really. They would either have to cultivate it or but everywhere else, and this is not unique to India. Everywhere that you grow these naturals, prices are really going up because you don't know anymore from season to season and harvest to harvest how it's going to go. So. Which is also again where synthetics come in, but also it's leading to a lot of a debate about the ethics, of the production, and a lot of the big perfume houses are investing more in trying to make the business a little more climate resilient. So we'll see, but in general, when you're talking about things that are grown naturally and harvested naturally, climate change is like a huge buzzkill.
You mentioned like there was resistance in the cultivators of North are talking, or how they're saying that this is the only way to do it, and they only want to do it the old way. But at some point, when we're looking at the future, when we're looking at going forward, how the industry has to move forward, there has to be a future marries the past, sort of. So is there a resistance to modern technique? amongst the old cultivators, old perfumers? In your opinion?
I wouldn't say there's a resistance. I think that there doesn't need to be, a resistance because, like you said, more people are interested now in the product, the way that it's produced, in the history of it, in the fact that it's being made in this old way. So they really believe in, not just in that we do it because we do it like this because we do it like this, but because they think that, the product in the end, the oil smells really good. These are really matters of preference. There are also, where I went into Madurai, jasmine is not produced like that. You do find in the north they do hydrodistill the jasmine as well, but for the most part, it's too delicate to go through that process. So it's the use of the more modern solvent washing process. So I wouldn't say that. I mean, it's like when I summed up the book in the afterword, what I said is that I think we're in this in-between space, and there's a lot more attention now on fragrance, which is great, and I think it will accelerate this process where they will choose which side to be on and decide, how it's going to go, but also that there is this new, there's a value now more than there has been before for the craft of it. So I don't think there's a need for them to completely change that and mechanize either.
Okay, so this book has just come out, like sometime last month. It might be too soon to ask, but what next? Is there a plan? Is there another book in the works?
No, there's no plan. It really is too soon. I hope to keep writing on this subject because it's something I really enjoy. And so then we'll see.
Okay. Before I let everyone else jump in with any questions that they have, we spoke about the Madeline effect right in the beginning, and how we associate certain smells, odors with certain memories. They trigger certain memories. What do these scents associate? Any memories that come up when I say saffron to you?
To me, saffron is just, I associate it with sweets and milk. Mithai, basically.
Of course.
Yeah.
And if I say rose?
Rose, I think for me the association is gardens and dew and sort of roses in the morning.
Okay, thank you. I think at this point, let's open it up. If anyone has any questions, we'll get mic sent to you.
Beautifully perfumed discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. But I'm very curious about, I think this is loud enough? Or maybe...
Not working.
Okay. Yeah, it's really not working. Thank you for a perfume discussion.
Thank you.
But there is one query in my mind. There's a very beautiful, I'm a Lucknow girl. Lucknow ki beti, Jaipur ki bahu. So I have grown up with a perfume which is called Mitti.
Yes.
That is the perfume of rain falling on parched earth and that beautiful fragrance. But I've always wondered, where is it distilled? Is it, now that you're talking about, is it synthetic or is it a natural perfume? But whatever it is, it's very expensive also.
Yeah.
And it's one of my favorite perfumes, Itar. But I would like to know more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. That is, I actually have written a little bit about it because to answer your question, it is a natural and it is distilled in Kannauj, like many other things. They actually use terracotta, they use coolers. And those are dried, for a certain amount of time, and then they sort of distill those, they dry distill them over sandalwood. So sandalwood is why it's so expensive, and also I guess the technique that goes into it. But yeah, Itar Gil is really very, very beautiful. I'm so glad you brought it up.
A revelation. Thank you.
We'll take one from this side and then come back to you.
Yeah, hi. What about the traditions of wearing perfume? Because I had this, interesting, meeting with this Saudi Arabian lady. She was giving away the samples of her perfume, She asked me to put my hands forward, and she poured it like we pour water, a lot of it, and she just asked me to apply it on my own. So I found it really interesting because we don't take perfume in our hands. So do you have any stories or any customs around it?
I think these are, and from what these are like cultural differences. Yeah, traditionally you don't take it in your hands because you use it quite sparingly, unless maybe it's rose water or one of those things that you can bathe with, I guess. But in how it's used, I think historically, if I was to answer that through the research that I've done, it would be that again, when you go way back, you see that these things were pre-distillation. They were used as like pastes, or they were burnt, and you fragranced your hair with that or your clothes with that. And khus was put in bath water, and that was used. And again, this is all being done by royalty and people who could afford it. And then when it came to the Mughals, they were like just profligate, and there's a story, and that's in the book that I have quoted from another historical source where they used pure rose oil to rub on their horses. The Nawabs, just because they could. It was just a sort of show of luxury and status. In the Middle East, they use typically a lot more fragrance maybe than when we do here, but they use again a lot of oud is burnt. The wood is burnt, and that fragrance is really common there, really favored over there. So I think these are cultural differences, and always interesting to see where it's based in oil, which is traditionally, all itar is oil based. In the Middle East, you'll see that it's mostly oil based because they won't use alcohol. They'll apply, and there's a ritual. Then you can have like those little rituals about how you apply it, where you apply it, and where you have it as alcohol, you spray it.
One year.
I really enjoyed this section. This is
Thank
the
you.
first time that one has really attended something on perfumes. Now, I have two questions. One is that when you go to buy perfumes, you put it on, and the fragrance you decide according to what smells you get. But sometimes when you come back and use that same fragrance, you find that after some time, it's not the same fragrance. What are the reasons for it? Also, there is a difference between men's fragrance and women's fragrance. And I personally, for myself, I find that the men's fragrance lasts longer. So there are certain body odors, body types that you have found out that for this body type, you need this kind of fragrance or something like that.
Thanks. So to answer your first question, I think that is mostly a function of when you go somewhere to a store and you spray a fragrance and you smell it there, you're typically doing it in an environment where there's been a lot of other things sprayed, and your nose gets confused really easily. So having worked at a brand where I had to go and discuss these things in the shops where we were retailing, I can tell you that we try to find ways to to avoid exactly this problem, And you see a lot of brands that do very cool things now. So either you have a little glass cloche and you smell, you pick it up and you smell the fragrance and you put it back, or I have seen boutiques where they have this,
Coffee beans or something.
not the coffee beans, but just something that can sort of puff it out to you, or like a little chamber where you go in and you spray it, and all kinds of really inventive things, just to avoid this problem that you're talking about. Because when you smell it, if you go to Sephora and you smell something, yeah, you're 100% not smelling what you're going to smell when you come back with it. So it's just, your nose gets tired. It's best to spray it, I guess, on a blotter, walk around with it somewhere else on those little strips and take it with you and smell it over some time and then make your decision. When you spray it on skin, it is going to change a little bit. I know people speak a lot about like how much it can change depending on body chemistry. Personally, I don't think that's true because fragrances are made they're made scientifically and they're quite stable. It's not going to change drastically from one person to the next. I'm really glad you asked about the men's and women's fragrance because this is like one of those hills I'll die on because this is just a marketing construct really and a pretty modern one. You should just wear whatever you enjoy.
Great, so one can enjoy very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Because historically, as we've seen, all of these really beautiful fragrances, whether they were rose or whether they were oud or whether they were jasmine, was worn by Nawabs and men who just, my own father wears, it's a really popular women's 70s fragrance, but he just likes it, so he wears it. So,
Thank you for the lovely aromatic evening you've given us.
Thank you.
There are lots of questions in my mind, but I'll limit myself to one or two. Food. Preparation of food, from the time it begins being cooked to when the end product comes through, the fragrances change. And you end up with an ultimate fragrance which you'd never like to wear. So, is there a difference in the trade about food fragrances vis-a-vis what you wear, what you spray on yourself or what you put behind your ears or on your wrist or wherever you do it? That's my first question. Did you know that the fragrance industry was in great distress during the COVID? Because one of the first things that happened was the sense of smell being lost. And they were very worried that the sense of smell may be lost forever. Think of it, a world without fragrances, without being able to perceive fragrances. What a horrible world it would be.
You're right. To answer the first part, that when you talk about the fragrance industry, it's always fragrance and flavor. And you see that there are like journals printed and periodicals, and it's always fragrance and flavor. And those are exactly the two categories that you are talking about. Fragrance will cover all of these materials that are used as perfume, and flavor will cover everything else. And there's a lot of like really exciting developments being made all the time in flavor. So they use really amazing kinds of molecular distillations and things like that for mangoes, for example, or for milk, or for wheat, and those are used in food, in the products that you buy to eat. Not nutmeg. That's covers both. You have fragrances that use nutmeg as well. So I think that really comes down to preference. Like I said, there's a huge trend for people wanting to smell like chocolate, like sweets, like pralines, like donuts. So
Put it on your...
Oh, they do put it behind their ears and they spray it on. So now that all those fragrances exist because people want them.
Got one right at the back over there.
I have a very simple question. You seem to lean towards synthetics in terms of your liking. So which one is your favorite?
My favorite synthetic?
Yeah. Like, is it floral? Is it like...
Okay, so I'm going to also confess that there are many. I've only smelled like a small proportion of them because it would have taken me many more years of study to go through all of them, and there are constantly new ones coming up. So I actually really do like these ones that are described as ozonic and watery. I really like those, and there's also. There was one that I really like. It's called Iris Nitrile. That's the name for it. But it smells to me like something you would use in a fragrance that if you ironed starched cloth. The fragrance, that smell that you'll get, you know, if you iron like a starched sari. It was that kind of smell, and I really like that.
That's interesting.
Hi, thank you. That was very, very interesting. Thank you. My question is that I'm just curious that through your travels across, whether to Madurai, Jasmine, Mysore, Kannauj, I mean, my leaning is more towards the natural, so my question is about that, you know, how tedious this craft is of distillery and, you know, kind of taking out the natural aroma. Is the next generation interested in this craft? Like, what was your observation? Like, what is, like, I'm sure it's happening since generations and wherever it is and wherever you travel. Like, are kids learning it of the family or the next generation? Is it being passed on?
Yeah, it is actually. It is being passed on, and the younger people are actually doing like a really great job, I think, in some cases of even like reviving it or just trying to market it more widely and make sure that it's like out there and like, you know, just trying to shake it up a little bit, whether it's in just the packaging and the marketing or whether it's in using these oils that we make and sort of developing newer fragrance, more modern fragrances with it. What I saw was that like if you have 3 or 4 generations in a family, the older people have worked on this in this very traditional way and they continue to trade in these materials, and maybe the youngest person has now gone to France to fragrance school, and then they bring that knowledge back and try to work with that.
Super, thanks.
Yeah, hi, my name is Manish. Thanks, Divrina, that was excellent,
Thank
very
you.
enlightening. I have a very especially pertinent to you because you have dealt with the magazines, as in Elle, Vogue, Harper's. Why is it that in the West, every design house worth its while has a fragrance or a repertoire of fragrances to their name? But in India, with such an extensive tradition of, you know, the oil fragrances and Ithran, none of the so-called fashion designers yet have a distinctive fragrance to their name in India. Why would you say that?
That's a great question. I think partly maybe it's just these older houses internationally have like a long history of it, so they continue it. It's one way that people can buy into the brand that is actually affordable, and so they keep that up. It takes very deep pockets also. So and then secondly, I think in India it has been attempted, but in small ways by brands, and maybe it hasn't. They just haven't produced anything that can compete with those. So so it's just a matter of quality and maybe time. So you know, there's so much choice. Like all of those fragrances that are developed by all of those houses are also available here. So you're actually like competing with all of those, and so I hope that with time someone will come up with something that can. But yeah.
Was one? Yeah.
Hi. So my question is on the same lines. Like in my generation, what I see that there is a lot of obsession with international brands when it comes to perfumes and fragrances. And like if we talk about the best perfumes, I think we are, like my generation is not even aware of the traditional Indian fragrances. There's a lot of focus on Dior or Chanel or brands like this. So why do you think that there is such a situation? Is it because of there is a deficit in marketing, packaging of these products, and what can be like done to make people more aware of our traditional Indian fragrances? Are there any Indian brands that produce such quality products, but we are not aware of them because of maybe they lack in their marketing initiatives?
I think that's a big part of it, because there are some Indian brands. I mean, they're all new and they're niche brands, and they're sort of doing their best. As to why people like prefer those, I don't think that because you have, you know, I don't think you have to like just because you're Indian and because you have them. So it comes down to taste really. It most certainly comes down to marketing as well. and so awareness is part of it and education is part of it, but you may have all of that, and you may read this book and you may go out and smell all of those and still decide like, actually I still like the other thing. It really just comes down to taste. And also this is, as a trade, a lot of what's good to know is that a lot of these oils that we produce in India are actually going into some of those fragrances. So you're still helping, I guess.
Do we have any more questions? Yeah.
We'll take the last two. Hello. Thank you for introducing us to this new genre of writing. We do have food culture, food smells in most of our novels and all. I have a question that you mentioned in your interview that there are certain stories that inspired you to write on this particular genre. So what kind of stories you're referring to? Are they like stories having certain characters like we do have in our cultural myths and all? So what kind of stories, can you mention any one particular?
No, so for me when I said stories, it was really that I was dealing with a lot of press releases that came to the office, because I was also working at a magazine and doing a lot of beauty writing as well, and that all of those releases were written in this very elaborate way, and when they describe the fragrance to you, they'll always tell you that it's the heart notes include some exotic pink jasmine from India. And then I would be like, what pink jasmine from India? And so I felt like I wanted to find out, how much of this is made up, which part of it is true, where does it come from, and then find the sources of these ingredients. So that was something that motivated me.
We'll take the last question.
I wanted to know, you have done a lot of research on this, and really must be very explicit in the book when I read it. But I wanted to know whether we have talked about oils from, plant sources. But I think they are also sourced from some animals like musk. Is there any ban on the use of these oils?
Yeah, musk is actually, you're right. Musk was traditionally used, but it has been completely banned for many decades now. I think since the 60s it's been completely banned, and that's when they developed synthetic musks, which are again really beautiful, and there are many of them, all qualities and sort of price ranges of musk. Simply because the musk deer is endangered, and in order to get natural musk you have to kill the deer. So that's been completely illegal for a long time. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it comes up often. People who read history know that musk is mentioned often, and so how come you didn't have a chapter on musk? And because I don't have anything to write. I can't. It's totally illegal.
Another question related to this is when they are developing synthetic perfumes, do they have quality control, testing for allergy, whether those things could be allergic to some people?
Yeah, there's extensive quality control. There are entire organizations dedicated to just that, and in fact they're much more with synthetics, because it's much easier to test, just because naturals are so much more complex. So most of the time, actually almost always, it's naturals that are getting banned from use, because they'll find something toxic in it, and so there are entire sort of categories of naturals that have over the years been banned, because those cause more allergies typically than a synthetic.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Divrina. That was actually revelatory, and I really didn't want the questions to stop. And thank you, Urvi, for holding it together. I'd like to request Neeru Saluja to come up and give the momentum to Speaker for the evening.
Developed like synthetic masks, which are again really beautiful, and there are many of them, all qualities and sort of price ranges of mask. Simply because the musk deer is endangered, and in order to get natural musk, you have to kill the deer. So that's been completely illegal for a long time. I'm glad you brought that up because I think it comes up often. People who read history know that like musk is mentioned often, and so how come you didn't have a chapter on musk? And because I don't have anything to write. I can't. It's totally illegal.
Another question related to this is when they are developing synthetic perfumes, do they have quality control, like testing for allergy, whether those things could be allergic to some people?
Yeah, there's extensive quality control. There are entire organizations dedicated to just that, and in fact, they're much more with synthetics because it's much easier to test just because naturals are so much more complex. So most of the time, actually almost always, it's naturals that are getting banned from use because they'll find something toxic in it, and so there are entire sort of categories of naturals that have over the years been banned because those cause more allergies typically than a synthetic.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Divrina. That was actually revelatory, and I really didn't want the questions to stop. And thank you, Urvi, for holding it together. I'd like to request Neeru Saluja to come up and give the momentum to Speaker for the evening. Thank you once again. That was absolutely spectacular.
Thank you. I'm so flattered that you're all like interested and that you'll read the book.
Oh yes, of course. I think everyone knows the drill. Please come up and get your book signed. It's one book per family. So, and we'll see you again next month.
Madani Pamaga